For everyone viewing, thank you for joining us. I'm Ira Gaberman, Senior Partner in Kearney, and I'm very happy to welcome Sheila Flavell, CBE, amongst many other awards. I am one of the leaders in Kearney's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion globally and sit on our DEI Council in Europe, and we're going to spend a little bit of time together having a fireside chat talking about these topics. But I want to thank Sheila for coming with us. For those who don't know her, though I know many of you will, Sheila is the COO of the FDM Group, which is a group that's dedicated to helping people get trained up and get into employment in the technology sector with technology skills across sectors. She's also the president of techUK, so obviously sitting at the table helping to influence government policy in this space as well. And she's been recognized for numerous awards, and I'm just going to mention a few, no doubt embarrassing you along the way, and I apologize for that. Sheila was, of course, recognized in the 2020 New Year's Honors List, so that's how you received the CBE, and that was for your services in gender equality in the IT sector. And obviously, that's a phenomenal recognition of what you've done. One of the most influential women in the UK Tech Hall of Fame, listed by Computer Weekly, Information Age Women of the Year in 2018, Lifetime Achievement Awards in the Scotland Women Tech Awards, Tech Champion, regularly named as one of the 25 most influential women in the North American mid-market by the CEO Connection. You've had Entrepreneur of the Year Awards, you have Leader of the Year Awards. I could keep going. So Sheila, we are deeply honored that you've given us the time today. We look forward to the conversation.
And thank you very much for inviting me along, Ira.
Sheila, thank you. I'm going to start, Sheila, if you don't mind, maybe, if you will, at the beginning. I mean, your career, when I had a chance to look into it, is fantastically diverse, and for many people, I'm sure they'll be very interested in that career path that you've taken. You started with the police force. You went from the police force into the airline industry. You went from the airline industry, I believe, back into education, which led you into the company that you're now leading when it was really at its early startup stages. Can you share with us a little bit around that journey and what were some of the more momentous moments?
Yeah, I was trying to think about how long I've actually been in the workplace, and it's over 50 years of full-time work. I joined the police force in 1973, and that was the police force in Glasgow. And that was before equal pay was introduced. So I was there before equal pay, and I was there during that transition to equal pay. And that was a really interesting journey. I spent 4 years in the police force. My number was WPC 247, 24/7, that was me. But there were very few women in the police force in those days. And when equal pay was introduced, the men didn't think we were up to the job. They didn't think we could do it as well as them. And we were thrust out into the streets. They wanted to prove their point. So I had a sergeant who didn't like women, and he particularly didn't like me. So he gave me the patrol that had the fish market. And during the dustbin strikes in the 70s, I was given bicycle clips to stop the rats running up my legs. I also had the river where people jumped off the bridge into the river. I was there when they were dragging some of the bodies out. And I had the city mortuary. Now, Jimmy, the mortuary attendant, he became my friend on the night shift because I'd pop down there to keep dry in those Glasgow wet, cold nights. And Jimmy's since murdered his wife, but that's a story for another day, and we don't have time for that now. But after 4 years of being in Glasgow, I decided that I could see my whole career in front of me, and I decided I wanted to spread my wings, and that's exactly what I did. I applied to an airline. I wanted to apply to an airline in a warm country, so I applied to Gulf Air, and off I went to live in the Middle East. Now, the average length of stay in the Middle East was 2 years, but I stayed 12 years. And it was a really, really interesting time. If I thought there was a lack of diversity in the police force, it was nothing to what I experienced in the Middle East in those days. In those days you couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia. Women didn't get senior positions. But I stayed for 12 years. I worked my way up in the airline, and I had a wonderful time. But unfortunately, the Gulf War started in the early 90s, and that meant that I had to come home. I had one child, and I was pregnant with a second, and I came back to the UK, having been out of the country for a long time, and I didn't know what to do. There weren't many sort of jobs are waiting for ex-airline workers with one and a bit children. And so I went back to university, or rather I went to university. I didn't do the traditional route. I didn't go to university following school. I went to university in my 40s, and I did 2 master's degrees. I wanted to understand what the gig was all about. And I found it really difficult to get a job. I think the only job that I was offered was being a waitress in the hotels in Brighton over the Christmas period. I then met a man who I always say changed my life forever, Ira Flavell, and he was setting up a business in the attic of his house. And he said to me one day, he said, "I can see something in you. I don't know what it is, but if you come and work for me, I'll help you find it." Now, that was 32 years ago, and that was the beginning of FDM, which of course we've built from an attic startup to be the FTSE 250 company it is today. And eventually, Rod and I married about 17 years ago. And, it's been a wonderful time, a great experience. And, we're still there. He's still the CEO, I'm still the COO, and, we live for another day.
It's a fantastic journey with great successes, and I think lots of twists and turns that many people would be interested in. I'd like to go back to the police force just for a second. I mean, you talked about how you were there before the Equal Pay Act was introduced and after the Equal Pay Act was introduced. What was that like in the police force when that act was passed?
Well, I remember I was earning £14 a week. I mean, isn't that ridiculous? But it was quite a decent salary for women in those days. We women didn't question it. We just accepted that we were being paid less than the men. It was the men who threw their arms up, and they absolutely reeled against it and tried to do what they could to stop it. Now, of course, you know and I know that when an act it goes through Parliament, when these policies change, then there's no going back. And there certainly wasn't going back then. It was tough, but things settled down. And nowadays we have female commissioners, female chief constables, we have women right at the top of the police force, and it's not questioned, and that's the way it should be.
I agree, and that's the way it should be. But I also know that when legislation gets passed, that sometimes there's so much resistance.
And there absolutely was. I mean, I remember when I went to police college for the first time for 3 months, there were 12 women on the course and 90 men. That kind of demonstrates to you just the lack of female representation in the police force then.
And it's good to see that things have changed, but no doubt still more to do.
Lots more to do, and in all industries, yes.
Absolutely. So I want to, you touched on a few things that I want to probe with you, but there's a few statistics that I think are worth mentioning, as part of the video, because I think there is still so much more to do on all of these dimensions, despite all the progress that's been made. And I was really struck by a few things. One of them is, and you may have come across this, one of our colleagues in our firm has recently just launched a new study that we've done with the WEF around the inequality in healthcare, because of the fact that most of the health services and health preventative design has been designed around the biology of men and the presenting symptoms of men. So it's not really designed to treat over 50% of our global population. The World Economic Forum's global report, most recent report on the gender gap, still a tremendous gap. I mean, no country has reached parity. No. Anywhere in the world. And the gender gap is still about 68% on average globally. This is huge and this is significant. I'd love to understand, because in your company that you're doing right now, what you're doing with the techUK and with the FDM Group is trying to help address that. So we know in the STEM fields that women are underrepresented. We know in the professional world, in the tech space, women are underrepresented. But you've introduced programs that have really shifted that dynamic significantly. The Return to Work program. Can you speak a little bit about that in terms of what led you to introduce those programs and what some of the outcomes have been?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ira. Women represent 50% of the population, but only probably about less than 20% of the tech population. Now, we're very fortunate in FDM because 35% of our workforce are female, but it's still not good enough. And you mentioned there about solutions, healthcare solutions being designed by men for men. And this is something that is now being addressed, thankfully. The airbag was designed by men for men, and it wasn't until there were many accidents or incidents that they finally sort of changed the crash dummies to that of having that of a female as well as a male dummy. And that situation has been replicated over and over again throughout all industries, not just healthcare, not just the motor vehicle industry. But you asked me about what we are doing at FDM. Well, we want to make sure that women have a voice, a louder voice. We want to make sure that women have a seat at the table when those tech solutions are being designed, because women are the greatest users of technology, so they have to be there designing it as well. Maybe about 9 years ago, I think, I created a returners program. Now, I had been a returner all those years ago when I came back from the Middle East, and I found it really difficult to get a job. And I don't want my children or any other woman to have to go through that sort of pain, if you like, that I went through, feeling extremely undervalued, having loss of confidence, and all the other things that go with, being redundant and not being able to secure a position that you feel that you could do very, very well. So our returners program, we've now put in excess of 500 women through the program. Now, legally, we cannot call it a women returners program, just a returners program. We've had some fantastic men through the program, men who are changing careers. But in the main, I would say about 80% are women who've perhaps taken time off for caring responsibilities or to have their children. Women are still the primary carers, and we have to have some flexibility within the workspace to be able to accommodate those people. I recognised very early on that the loss of confidence that women suffer when they're out of work, when they've been out of work for a period of time. So the first thing that we actually train them in is some confidence boosting stuff. And without that, then they're not really taking in the more technical topics. The training is anything between 6 to 8 weeks, but the women who've gone through our program, they're absolutely amazing, and they've been doing amazing things before they took the time off. So we're very, very proud of that program. We've won lots of awards because of it. We've also helped mentor other organisations to build their own programs. So we're actually doing it. We're not just talking about it, and we need more organisations to be doing the same.
And one of the things that really struck me when I looked into, or read about what the program is achieving, is that the pay gap is almost reversed.
Yes.
In the cases of some of the women that have gone through this program.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah, since reporting was introduced in 2017, I think it was 16 or 17, I think it was 17, we reported a zero gender pay gap. Now, because of the growth of our returners program, we now have a negative. We have negative 4% pay gap. So we have to be careful we don't swing too far into the negative, otherwise men will feel that they're being discriminated against. But, isn't that fantastic? And a lot of that is because of our returners program, because our returners are experienced women who are earning a bit more than the graduates and the apprentices, obviously, and that's boosted our pay gap.
I mean, it's a tremendous result, and I think many people would be surprised by that, because many people are trying to get to, as you said, to a zero pay gap.
But the other thing maybe that I'd like to mention is that before COVID, the returners program was going well. Eventually it went well. It was really tricky to start that program because women tend not to have a natural network. So we didn't know where to find the women other than go down to the school gates and kidnap them. But eventually, by just throwing money at advertising, we found our way. But COVID actually created an opportunity for our returners program because it allowed companies more flexibility, and in particular ours. So instead of our returners having to arrive into one of our UK centres like London, Leeds or Glasgow, they were recruited remotely, they were trained remotely, And so they could take the kids to school, they could pick them up at the end of the day. Did it really matter if there was a child sitting on their lap or a cat crossing the keyboard? Not really. And also they're being placed with our clients remotely, a lot of them, and if not remotely, certainly in a hybrid fashion. So through COVID, we got an influx of returners applying to us, and the numbers have just rocketed ever since.
And I would expect that would continue with the current economic
I fully
environment.
expect it to, and I hope so, because we need those women in the workplace.
So it's also interesting, and I agree we do, because one of the other statistics that I recently read is that the gender imbalance, particularly in STEM fields, could contribute to over $1 trillion of lost GDP globally, and I think in UK alone over 100 billion.
158 billion.
158 billion, perfect to be exact. And so we can't afford as an economy and as a society to allow that to continue. So I agree with you, made more of that continue in what you've just described.
Well, there's a finite number of graduates, and there's a growing need for tech skills. And if you think about it, every single company, or every single sector, even farming, is underpinned by technology. And we need people to be better skilled in STEM, in tech. So we need the graduates, we need the apprentices, the kids who don't go to university, we need the women, we need them all.
Absolutely, and I noticed also in some of your other programs, and I'm sorry I won't be able to refer to the name of the particular program, that you have a really high proportion of first-time university attendees within their families coming to you, getting trained, going into really meaningful roles. So obviously it's not just about gender, it's also about social diversity and social mobility that your organization's helping to address. Can you speak to that side?
Yeah, we're a company where, I mentioned to you earlier, I didn't go to university till I was in my 40s. I have another colleague who's never been to university. And our finance director has been to university, and our CEO, he did, I think it was sports science course. It has nothing to do with STEM whatsoever. So, right from day one, we've never really been hung up on only taking in graduates. In fact, some of our best technologists are kids who are stacking shelves in supermarkets, driving taxis, working in petrol stations. We hired a fantastic woman not so long ago, and she was our taxi driver, but she was a great communicator. So the best academics are not always the best tech workers. Had we not been as inclusive as an organisation as we always have been, we would not have enjoyed the success that we have to date after 32 years.
I think you're a great example of how organizations need to break through some of the barriers that are preventing this better rebalance in these fields. Things around stereotyping. That STEM subjects are, a masculine field, right? What an absurd way to think of a sector in a set of academic fields. The fact that there's a huge amount of unconscious bias that probably seeps into job and talent assessments and role placements. What advice would you give organizations that are out there, as every organization is, looking for this talent to fill roles? We know it's in scarce supply. We know organizations are fighting for the same talent pools. What would you advise organizations in terms of addressing those two issues of misstereotyping and unconscious bias?
Look beyond the resume, the CV, and look at the person. We always ask, we used to ask, I don't know whether we do now, is, what are your hobbies? And people who were involved in team sports, you'll do, great, come in, because we want team players. We love people who play a musical instrument because, their mind is tuned into coding. They turn into very good coders. Look beyond that CV. And, a lot of kids, they mature academically much later than others. So therefore, don't worry if that person's got a 2-2 and maybe didn't do so well in their A levels. It's there's more to life than that. And give these kids a chance. The number of people that we have given a chance to that other companies would not have done, and they have shown their loyalty and their commitment to us for many, many years. And we've had generations, and we do have generations of the same family going through our program.
These are wonderful stories, and I have to also just share from a Kearney perspective. I mean, one of the things that I think, not unlike many of the other consulting firms and other professional services firm, we're all, seeking talent from the same small set of universities in graduate schools. And what we've learned over the years is how narrow, that pipeline is, and how many, talented communities we've just ignored as a consequence of that. So we look much more broadly than we ever have historically. And it's great that these are messages that FDM is also helping to amplify.
Yeah, we're very aligned, and it's fantastic to hear you say that. Talent resides in all forms, not just in top UK universities.
Absolutely. Let me ask you another kind of hurdle that I think gets in the way of this, advancing on this, which is role models. Mm-hmm. So, we know from our own experience, again, within Kearney, that our ability to attract people from diverse backgrounds, one of the things that community is looking for are to see role models already within the organization. And of course, that's a catch-22, because at some point you have to bring the talent in to become the future role models. How do you advise organizations on that? And for you, what have been some of your own role models that have helped you through your career?
That's an interesting thing. I mean, role models, mentors, they tend to be two interchangeable words. A role model can be a mentor and vice versa. Role models, I think, tend to be people who inspire us, people probably that we've never met. You've got your politicians and your Mother Teresa's and Mahatma Gandhi's, and role models tend to be public figures. If you ask a group of people who's your role model, they'd probably say something like Michelle Obama or whoever is topical at that time. Role models are people that we put on a pedestal, that we demand perfection from them. I suppose it must be quite tough being a role model, such a role model. They're people who inspire us, and people that we want to emulate. But in fact, we can all be, we are all role models. We might not be good role models, but we are all role models. And there'll be people who do want to follow us. What we want to be is the very best version of ourselves.
And for yourself, did you have any, whether it's a mentor or a role model that was critical for some of your career decisions as you were, going through the different stages that you described earlier?
Yeah, the problem with me is I didn't plan anything. It was circumstances led from one thing to another. And I feel my journey was quite exciting, going into the great unknown, because I kind of made a spontaneous decision and then just went with it. Along the way, there were people, not famous people, more people that I knew, that I admired, that I thought, I'd like that job, or I can see myself doing that. The one thing about me is I always backed myself, and I always had a quiet confidence. I used to be really shy as a kid, but I grew out of that as I went into adulthood, but I've always quietly backed myself and just went where the mood took me. But I haven't had very many jobs.
Well, it's great, because you need to have a good radar that navigates you, and it sounds like you had the confidence to keep following your judgment and your intuition.
I'm not a risk taker, because I always look to see, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? If this doesn't work out, then what? And when I left the police force, they gave me 6 months in which I could change my mind and come back, so there wasn't really much of a risk. But when I left the Middle East, I was kind of heading into the great unknown, because I left because of a war. I had children, which I'd never had, obviously, when I left the UK. And in those days, nobody wanted to employ a mum with young kids, because, they probably thought, she's going to be off work with chicken pox and all sorts of different things that the kids give them. Back then it was different, and we were discriminated against.
And can you, and sadly, I think some of that still continues today. I think there's still a lot of bias around that, unfortunately. Any experiences you had where you felt that you were held back as a consequence, where you weren't given the same opportunities, where you weren't invited in, where you saw other male colleagues? Any And how did you, if yes, and how did you kind of move past that?
My husband says I'm a bit of a rhinoceros, and my philosophy in life is do what you can't. I just kind of put my head down and just go for it. I think, to be quite honest, my worst experience was in America, funny enough, where I attended a wedding near Hilton Head Island. And the day before the wedding, there was a golf tournament, which I was the only woman to participate in the golf tournament. And after the golf tournament finished, all the men went into a bar, and I went into the ladies' changing room, and then I thought I'd better join the guys in the bar, and I was kicked out. It was a men-only bar in the men's changing room. Yeah. And I was furious, and that was only probably about 6 years ago.
So I can share with you a little bit of a story that, and I don't remember when this was, but it's a couple of decades ago. My mother actually brought a suit against her country club because of being excluded from the 19th hole, which was exactly where all the men would retire after playing golf and all the women were excluded.
I mean, this is a very tongue-in-cheek example, but this was only recently, and I was sat there on my own in a women's changing room with a kettle and some coffee while they were all living it up in the bar.
That's outrageous. I mean, because the disadvantages of that, I mean, it's where sometimes business gets done, social networks get formed. It's just an immediate, structural disadvantage. It's just unacceptable.
But in the main, I can't really quote any examples of recent.
Good.
Certainly from a long time ago, but that was then and this is now. And, I do believe things are getting better. I have three daughters, 2 daughters and a stepdaughter. And, I want to make sure the world is a good place for them to enjoy work and for my grandchildren.
Well, I think with the attitude, if I got it correctly, was do what you can't.
Do what you can't.
Do what you can't. I think that's a life, that's a life mantra. Which probably leads to you becoming a helicopter pilot. Do what you can't. So I also read an article, and I think you referred to as Pilot Bibi?
Yes.
Can you share that story?
Okay, so my daughter, my eldest daughter, was born in the Middle East, and when her child was born, I thought granny sounded a bit old. My mother's 95 and she's granny. So I thought, what did I want to be called? And in the Middle East, the children called their grandmother Bibi, and the respected one. I thought, that'll do. So all the children call me Bibi. And it was just after, it was before COVID, actually. Before COVID, I was out cycling. And I cycled past Shoreham Airport in Sussex, and I happened to look to my left and I saw a sign that says advanced helicopters, and something made me stop. I had never thought about being a helicopter pilot, but something made me stop. I parked my bike and I went inside and I said to the fellow behind the desk, do you teach people to fly helicopters? And he said, yes, that's what we do as a business. I said, is there an age restriction? To which he said, no. I said, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And that was it. So I learned to become a helicopter pilot. It's quite a tricky thing to do.
So given that, clearly very little holds you back. What's next on your list for things that you want to tackle and achieve? I'd
like to be able to play the bagpipes. I've bought a lovely piano. I'd like to improve my piano. And there's one other thing that I wanted to do, but it can't be that important because I can't think what it is now. But I'm sure I'll find plenty.
Well, I think helicopters, bagpipes, and pianos is a perfect combination. I think that's wonderful. What's your advice to then a female entrepreneur? How does she access?
Just keep going.
Just keep going.
Just keep going. Keep knocking at the doors. Countries are waking up to the fact that VC and private equity, they're only providing funding to 2% of the females. Now, we also need more women to be actually starting their own businesses. So we need more help to those women as well.
And we need, I think, ways to amplify and showcase and champion those who are and those who are being, running successful businesses.
Everything we've talked about just now in this conversation, it all starts with the board, top down. People need to look at the board and needs to reflect the organisation and the people within the organisation. People need to see people like them in senior positions.
And I think the private equity industry itself is still a little bit more male dominated as well. So as the gatekeepers of investment, That's also, a contributing factor.
Absolutely.
So if you kind of project forward a little bit with daughters, and if I understand also grandchildren.
Yep, 5.
5 grandchildren. It's a wonderful number. What would you envision for them? What would your hopes be for them?
I would want to see them enter a business world where you're judged on your performance, you're judged on merit, and gender, it just doesn't come into it. I want them to enter into a business world where we're not talking about inclusivity, we're not talking about discrimination, but these words need to be sort of deleted out of the corporate vocabulary at some point, and we just need to be talking about talent and capability.
I couldn't agree more. Sheila, let me thank you. I think that was wonderful. I think you've given us so many experiences and words of wisdom that hopefully all of our viewers are going to be able to take away. I've learned a lot. I think in terms of the resilience, the diversity of career path, the courage to pivot and try new things, to have the belief that you can make it a success and try things that you can't, I think are messages we all need to hear. So
and thank you, Ira, and thank you to Kearney for having me here today. And let's work together to inspire inclusivity.
Absolutely. You have our commitment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila.